So, welcome to the show. Will is the man when it comes to all things hospitality and podcasts. He actually has his own hospitality.fm, which is a network of all these different podcasts that help educate people in the hospitality space. Not only that, Will is a big contributor to this community in general in terms of education. He manages 10 of his own properties, and more on how he actually got through all of this, coming from a place of depression and overcoming that and becoming somebody of wild importance in our space. So, Will, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you for that intro. That was very generous and very nice of you. I appreciate it. But I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited to chop it up and get hopefully some good value out of this for your listeners here.
For sure. So tell us, how did you get started what's your background? Like, tell us a little bit about Will.
Yeah. If you want to talk about professional background, easiest place to start was I had a failed attempted chauffeur company where I tried to ride the coattails of Uber, basically. And I was in business for a year, had cars, had a party bus, all this type of stuff. Had no idea what the hell I was doing. So a year to date of owning that business, I closed it, lost everything basically through massive debt on these vehicles, and just went through a weird time in life. But having that entrepreneurial itch, I realized, hey, I have all these suits in my closet now that are just wasting their time just sitting there or being hung up in my closet. And I was like, all right, I need to find a job because I need to make money because I just incurred a massive amount of debt and I need to pay bills. I went to this hotel down the road. It was a 4-diamond Marriott property. And I put on one of my best suits. I walked in with a semi-tweaked professional resume and asked for the manager and got interviewed on the spot, got hired right after that, and fell in love with hotels and the world of hospitality through that experience at that hotel, especially through a really weird and kind of dark period of my life. And that's what introduced me into the greater world of short-term rentals and vacation home management to podcasting and all the above. So that was my intro into the industry.
That's awesome. And how did you land upon podcasting, though, specifically?
Yeah. So the podcast was started late 2017, early 2018. And I moved myself to the Oregon coast after I was at that first hotel for about 2 to 3 years. Wasn't able to really move up in management just because it was such a big property, 716 rooms and restaurants and bars all over the place, valet parking, you name it. It was a very nice hotel, but very hard to move up. So I went to the Oregon coast where I grew up going as a kid and was like, you know what? It would be sentimental to just like work in the place I used to go as a kid when my parents would take us out for a week or something like that. And so I went to the Oregon coast near Cannon Beach, and I eventually worked my way up through a management position with this private hotel group. But when I was at the house I was staying at the time, I was bored. I would go to work, I would work all day, and I would come home and I would just be like, what do? I have nothing. I have no one out here that I know. I have nothing to do in the sense of activities. Yeah, you only go crabbing and fishing and stuff like by yourself for so long. And then you're like, all right, I'm bored. I'm tired of my own company. And so I was watching a video with Gary Vee and Tony Robbins, and they were doing a video. I don't know if it was a daily V or if it was one of those V videos. And the little clip that they did together was like, hey, idiot, you have something to talk about? Guess what? Get a $20 mic off of Amazon, go to anchor.fm and start a podcast. And I was like, fine. Okay. Challenge accepted. And with the last name being Slickers, I was like, all right, my podcast will be Slick Talk. I'm not passionate about anything else outside of hospitality. So I'll just call it Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast, and paid someone $5 off of Fiverr to do my intro and outro at the time. It's a lot different now than it was back then, but really had no idea
back then,
what
by the way. Can we know, like, when did this happen?
2018. Yep.
2018. Okay.
Yeah. So started doing this like at the end of 2017. And I think I'd launched like my first episode in March of 2018. And it was very inconsistent. Had no idea what the hell I was talking about. I was very uncomfortable talking by myself to a microphone and to a fake audience, basically. And so it was definitely way different than it is now. But that was the leap I took. I just watched some video on YouTube and took the advice.
Cool. So let's break that down, because first of all, I want to know, through this hospitality network journey that you've been on, which we'll go to more in detail a little bit later.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, how has that impacted your business? Has that actually created new opportunities for you? Has that let you get more real estate deals? Like, how did that really contribute to your success?
The network in the sense of our property management company, or are you talking
Yeah, the network and your own podcast.
Yeah, so the podcast is what really created the network. So I would say I started the podcast 2018, December 27th was my last day as a hotel manager. I gave my 3-week notice 3 weeks prior to that date. And I was at that point where I had enough listeners and I was getting enough monetization through brand deals and sponsorships that I was able to take that risk. I was like, all right, I think I'm onto something. But if I freed up 70 hours of my week in order to pursue this more than I can or than I have been able to, I think I could make this podcast really successful. And so I did that. And in 2020, obviously, we got hit with COVID, started over from the ground up. Basically, I lost every guest, every sponsor, didn't publish an episode until April of 2020 again to figure out what is COVID, what are we dealing with as an industry, as a society, all this other stuff. And then eventually the world started opening up and things started getting back together. And next thing, I'm being asked to go to a vacation rental management conference. And that's where I had a line of sponsors saying, hey, we want to sponsor your show. And I was already sponsored again after about 8 months of not receiving any revenue. And I was like, cap myself out unless I create like more episodes or another podcast. And I was like, I don't want to create another podcast because I already had a second one that was just starting to take off too. And so I was like, this line of podcasters is asking me the same questions. How did you get the podcast full time? How do you get better guests? How do you streamline coordinating all this information and editing your content and distributing? And what metrics do you go off of? And the same questions happen over and over again. So I was like, okay, I'm going to take the two together. I'm going to create a network. I had this idea a year prior, but wasn't able to execute on it. It just was bad timing. It wasn't the time to do a network. If I started it a year before, it wouldn't be where it is today. So I got everybody and was like, all right, if we work with you on production and getting your show to the level it needs to be, we're going to take X amount of commission from sponsorship deals because I have everyone ready to go. Sponsors said, hey, we'd love to be on your podcast, but if you can't take us, where can we go? We have this marketing budget. So that's when the network was created and it changed everything. And it doesn't really apply to the real estate deals or to managing properties and stuff. It does give us credibility. My business partner and I do get to use that. We are involved in the biggest podcast network in hospitality, the only podcast network in hospitality. Yes, you have bigger pockets and stuff like that in real estate, but if you go just hotel, restaurant, short-term rental, guest experience stuff, we're the only one there is. And so with that, it does give us credibility, but I wouldn't say it brings us a ton of deals in the sense like we're using it for that platform for that route. We're really using it. I would say my passion is guest experience. I, of course, love creating a destination out of a property, but my biggest passion is working with other creators because I finally got to experience freedom in the first time of my life, if that makes sense. And I'm not saying freedom as if I was like held gunpoint and was told I couldn't do stuff throughout my life, but freedom for the first time in the sense of financial. Granted, there are days and months where I'm like, all right, we need to hunker down and penny pinch and just cut costs. You always got to be hungry, and sometimes comfort can ruin that. And so anyways, I'm going off into another tangent, but the podcast network has changed my life and many others' lives in a very positive way because it's brought a group of people, whether they're lonely or they're not lonely or just don't know if it's going to work or whatever. Now we're able to come together and share that same experience together, if that makes sense.
That's amazing. And one other thing that I really noticed with these podcasts is that you're able to impact people at scale. You can have multiple people get inspired through your words and what you say. And the fact that you're supporting that ecosystem of people that are supporting other real estate investors, that are supporting guests. This is like deep, but yeah. I feel like you're impacting the most amount of people possible with your time. You know what I mean? So I think that's going into that, and correct me if I'm wrong, into direction of impacting as many guests as possible just by doing this kind of framework, right? Which is what your goal was to begin with, is guest experiences, right?
Guest experience for sure. But then like you get cool. I'm going to give a shameless shout out to Tatiana Taylor Tate. She's one, amazing, but the ability to have all these podcasters connected together now, they're creating their own content. They're talking to who they want to talk to and what they want to talk about. We don't tell them what to do or who to talk to. But now you have the opportunity where there is now a mutual connection that we all have, and that's the network. And so Tatiana, I probably would have met her, which we'd met in Nashville at the STR Wealth Conference with Natalie
Right.
Palmer and a few other mutual friends that we have. But if we didn't have the network, I wouldn't have been able to have her on my show. And then she DM'd me like a couple days ago, or maybe a week or so ago, and some random person who I've never heard of, and it was a listener of my show, listened to her episode and DM'd her saying, "I was so inspired by your story. Thank you so much for sharing and going into a vulnerable state for that."
Wow.
I've never seen this or heard of this person's, and I had no idea she was a listener to the show, but she listened to Tatiana's story, and it was enough to make her want to go out of her way and reach out to her directly. So to me, that, like, right there, if that one moment happens once a year, twice a year, whatever amount of times, that's what makes it super impactful for us. It's like you are inspiring other professionals in the space to go above and beyond their comfort zone and to really feel connected to you outside of a LinkedIn post or an Instagram reel or whatever it might be. Like, you are able to reach them on a different level through audio. So yeah, it's become something I've put a heavy focus on for this year.
Yeah, no. And I definitely see that happening even for myself. Like, even people that are listening to me might not relate to me for whatever reason. Totally cool. But then they go to somebody that's a guest on my show and they reach out. That happens pretty often, actually. Yeah, that's another thing I really didn't think about. The people that are listening that are ready to start a podcast and want to do in the real estate space, how do you recommend getting started with something like that? What are the benefits that you see? Can you maybe break that down?
Yeah, my answer today is a lot different than my answer in 2019 when I went full time with it. So I will say it was a lot easier back then. I had a lot of forgiveness through the listeners that listened to really bad audio quality and lots of poor editing and all this other stuff. Maybe not thought well of episodes, and that just maybe made no sense, or whatever, a bad guest that was on the podcast. A lot of forgiveness from that audience back then. Today, we are seeing the biggest shift in attention spans with society in general. So getting anyone to click on your show is becoming harder and harder, especially if they'd never heard of you, along with retaining that attention through your content that they listen to. So my biggest thing today, talking to anyone who wants to become a podcaster or create this media company, which I call it, where whether you're an influencer on Instagram and TikTok and you want to create a podcast to reach and further monetize, it's a great idea, but you need to have the time. You really need to be true to yourself. Can I consistently keep this up? And can I take the time to sit back and evaluate the show and see what's working, what's not working, make changes, and being okay with it not being perfect right at the gate? Because if you are, then you definitely should start a podcast. Buy a good microphone that you have, a Shure SM7 or an SM7, something that I have, and get on a platform like StreamYard or Zoom if you are a lower budget, like you don't want to pay for Riverside or whatever. Like, you can find anything to really record. And if you're doing a solo podcast, you can even find a little mobile mic to put on your phone and use a voice memo. There's a lot of little stuff you can do, but get consistent at content creation in the sense of audio. And I would say hire an editor at the gate, or find a friend that you feel like is good and they can spend some time to chop things up. I've probably said a couple ums and uhs on the podcast today. So being able to chop those out and find different softwares to level out the
Can I give a recommendation while you're talking for what I use? So I'm low budget. I have Zoom. We're on Zoom right now. I don't really have too many listeners. The people that do listen, I'm so grateful for you guys, by the way, that you guys even made it this far. Amazing. And one thing that I want to recommend is Descript. Descript.
I was just going to share that too. It's one of our favorite tools. Yeah. Keep going though. Keep going.
Super easy. Gets rid of all the ums. I'm going to do it for this podcast, and hopefully you don't hear any ums when you listen to this, but I just said it. Dang, now I'm going to think about it. Anyways, so pretty much what you do is it's just one button press and it gets rid of all of it, which is amazing. Super easy to edit on it. Definitely recommend it for podcasting, all kinds of editing. And yeah, that's all I wanted to chime in on.
No, I was gonna say there's a great tool in there too. This is one of our secret sauces that we love to use because I used to be a stickler with guests and be like, hey, you have to be in a great spot, good Wi-Fi, no echoey room. Like I used to be super, and if they did show up in an echoey room or really bad Wi-Fi, like, all right, we got to reschedule. I'm not going to put my editor through that because I was the editor for the longest time, but then also not going to put my listeners through that. We want quality, we want your attention, and we want you to be presenting your best self because now we are at that point where like we have a big audience. But with Descript, the best tool, not only can it transcribe for you, take out all the ums and uhs. If you use this little feature, you hit the audio file like wavelength at the bottom. There's an add effect. You hit studio sound. If your guest has AirPods and that's what they recorded off of, and you have a professional microphone, you can put that file through studio sound. It'll make you guys sound just as close to. There's a couple times where it messes up or it doesn't sound as good, but you put it through there and it will make you sound as if
Like a
both of you are
podcaster.
yeah, both of you are on a podcast
Wow.
mic. Yeah, yeah.
I did
It's
not
great.
know that. That
Yeah.
is new to me.
Yeah.
Okay, you just blew my mind. So
Yeah.
quality is going up for my podcast from here on out, baby. Let's go. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
No, of course.
And so you have to be, so to iterate, you have to be consistent. You have to, like, it's not going to be perfect right off the bat. You have delayed expectations of results. You're really not going to get results for a while, I'm assuming. And you should be okay with that. And if you're okay with that, then you should push content in general. It doesn't even have to be podcasts. It could be all forms of content. I feel like that's the same thing. Because I think it's the low barrier of entry now, right? Anybody can do it. So you got to be very strategic about how you enter into the space. And so I think that's, which we won't go too much into, but I think the same thing with Airbnbs. Everyone expects, hey, this is going to be super easy to do. I just buy a house or I just manage somebody's property, but everyone else can also think the same thing. So you're competing against everybody else and you got to stand out and you got to be different. And so now people are realizing you can't just put something up on Airbnb and expect it to flourish. So interesting how those two parallels collide.
I was going to say, I don't know if I could swear on this podcast.
Where?
Okay. I was like, I never know. But a lot of people think their shit don't stink. And I will just say, if you think your shit don't stink and you go into a podcast, and let's say you ball out, you get expensive cameras, you get expensive sound decks and microphones and all sorts of stuff. If your content in the sense of not as look, but the quality of like your conversation or your talking points, if that is garbage, no one cares how nice your stuff looks. So always be intentional with your content and like who you're bringing on and what you're talking about and the attitude you portray. And, I think that really does make a difference because again, you're fighting for their attention and you get their attention, but it's not good. They're going to leave no matter how pretty the reel looks or how pretty anything. And also for podcasters that are wanting to start, whether you're solo or with guests, record video. And it can be just like this on Zoom, record video, do the audio thing. But now you have a storage. I'd rather say I have it than say I wish I recorded that on video because you can always find a database of clips to chop up. It's great promotion for the show. It's always great to use as you've gone into a year of podcast hosting because then you can go in the database and publish clips that promote old episodes to get more listens back on the backlog. There's a lot of little stuff you can do. So always just record the video. Even if you don't use it right away, just have it because you'd rather have it than not. Yeah, same with Airbnb. A lot of people think their shit don't stink, but the property's garbage or they're in a shit location. And they see a TikToker post about it on TikTok and then they think they can do it. And they don't understand that they didn't analyze the market well enough. So yeah, there's a lot of comparisons to both short-term rentals and podcasting.
Yeah. And so let's bring it back now. So 2022, you can't make it shitty. You got to make sure it's quality stuff. Yeah. What's the ingredients to make it quality stuff? Let's go deeper into it.
I would say the biggest thing I've seen and the biggest thing I even struggle with too, I know a lot of us do, whether they're in the network, out of the network, creators in general, being yourself. Like that's as cheesy as it is. It is so hard when you get a camera or a microphone in front of you to actually let a guard or wall down. to just be you. That's the biggest struggle I've seen, and a lot of other people when behind closed doors and non-recorded conversations, people are like, "Oh man, I don't know, I either freeze up or my voice goes higher, or they do all these certain things that give a persona rather than showing their true self." So I think really be comfortable with who you are. Be okay that guess what? Thankfully, like in this space, I would say the real estate guys are a little bit more savage than the hospitality side. But thankfully, these days, like in our industry, people aren't shit talking you if you have a bad post or a podcast episode. Most people, if they don't like it, they won't listen and they'll just move on for the day.
Yeah, but there are people that shit talk. Don't get me
Oh,
wrong.
100%.
I have my haters.
100%. There's 100% people that should talk. But thankfully, it's not like a public forum where you see like these YouTubers or TikTokers just getting destroyed by strangers in the comment section.
Oh my God, yeah.
And as a lot of people say, oh, it's just comments. You don't know who they are. But like at the end of the day, like people still care about how others think of them.
That's a human thing to care
human.
about what people think. I don't care what anybody says. Everyone cares what people think to some degree.
100%.
Otherwise, you wouldn't fit in. You would die. Like in primal times, at least. Not now, but
I know you're going with that. But no, it's like thankfully our industry isn't like that. So it's very forgiving. I think if you just take that opportunity and really focus on what you love, be yourself and focus on what you love. If you love talking about mortgage lending and how you can use that to leverage a vacation home to add to your portfolio, let that be the secret sauce that gets you amped up and creates really good content for people looking for that. If it's providing really good guest experience or being a good host or growing partnerships within your local community, let that be your secret sauce and run your content and use that. Don't overkill it, but use that as a point to really build some quality with your quality trust with your listeners or with your viewers, because then they're going to listen to more that you say outside of that realm because you've already built that.
Can I ask you a question about that? Yeah. So what do you think about yourself that got you to this confident level that you are today? Because you feel, at least the way that I feel in this conversation, it feels very like comfortable, very like you seem very comfortable with yourself. You seem very okay with talking and speaking your mind. But was that always the case? Or is that something that you had to work on over time?
Dude, this is what 9 or 10 years of self work, where when I was in high school, I was a people pleaser. I had middle school and high school were like some of the best, I wouldn't say the best years of my life, but they were the best periods that I can reflect on now, because I had no idea who I was. I had no idea who I wanted to be. I was very lost in a lot of ways where I had no core friend group in reality. I had a lot of friends. I was the guy that was friends with the jocks and friends with the band kids and friends with the drama students and friends with the quote unquote emos and like all these certain groups. I loved hanging out with everybody. I just loved being with people. And with that came with a lot of struggles, because again, I very much cared what all these groups thought of me, because they all wanted to have me around for a good time or whatever. I was just like that lucky, happy guy that just made everyone laugh or whatever. And deep inside, I would go home and I would be super depressed. I didn't feel like I related to my family, because my parents wanted me to become a pastor, and I'm close with my family today. But, my whole life I was brought up to be, you're going to go to church with the family. You're going to, like, you have been spoken on to be a leader in the church, and you're supposed to be preaching and all this other stuff. So I became like a camp pastor at 18 and 19.
Wow. So high expectations, right?
Yeah, 100%. And it was like I was living this life off of everybody's else expectation of what I was supposed to do, especially at a young age. Like I don't remember the exact moment, but my mom told me that someone from the church was like, and this is nothing crazy. It's not like Mormon. It's just like what do you call it? Non-denominational church. It was like just normal, like
not conservative, like crazy conservative or anything.
No, just a non-dom church. And someone, when I was a young kid, because I will say, like, a little self like plug is like I could control a room as a kid. Like when I would walk in and all the old people and the kids and I could stir up the conversation, get people laughing, and introduce myself without having any fear of stage fright. So that led into living my life off of everybody else's expectation of Will's going to become a pastor. You've spoken on this as a young kid. It's a natural God-given gift. And then I get to 19 years old and I went through a period like right after high school of being homeless and going into the military so that way I could get my life out of that homeless situation. And there was a couple dark years, man. Like seriously, like attempted suicide. And I would just say for a lot of people, I think no one teaches you entrepreneurship and no one teaches you, at least in my perspective, self identity in the sense of being okay with trying things that you want to try because you want to try them, not because other people want you to do it. I was told I had to do a sport or play an instrument growing up. I didn't want to do either. I hate sports. I'll watch them for shits and giggles with people to socialize, but I'm not a guy that does a fantasy football league. I don't even know how to play football. So I don't follow the sport or anything. But I was told you had to be in a sport or play an instrument. So I don't know. There was a lot of dark days. And so I think that, and then finally getting to a point where I saw something of my own, aka the podcast, really take off in 2019. I think that year was the most pivotal like year for me as a human, not just because it was like, oh, entrepreneurial going in full-time podcast. It was like, no, I learned a lot, dude. Like I went through a lot of heartache that was buried down in the decades worth of unknown hurt and struggle. So yeah, I would say I've never been this calm and collective until after everything prior to that.
Wow.
Very thankful for those moments, but yeah.
So would you say that podcasting changed your life in the sense that it helped you find your purpose, but it wasn't the actual podcasting, it was more the ability to just be comfortable with yourself and who you are and really just dive deep lower?
Yeah, and I would say like a lot of our mutual friends were doing this book, the Hospitable Hosts book,
Yeah.
and my chapter is all dedicated on like hospitality saved my life. The podcast, I would say like you're 100% was a big piece of that. But I think when I got into the hospitality industry and I discovered that all my life I've always had a passion for people. Even when I was in the military, like I was still that guy that just wanted to be friends with everybody. I didn't care if you're tall, short, white, black, gay, straight, you name it. I just wanted to be friends and have a good time and get to know people's stories. And that for me, when I got into the hospitality side through hotels, I still have some of my return guests that I still talk to from 7 years ago, 8 years ago. It's crazy to me, like Mr. Rhodes and Mrs. Chardine and Mrs. Malone. I still talk to them, and they were my first like guests as a hotel agent. So, yeah, I think just discovering that passion for people was really what changed the trajectory for me personally.
Wow. And there's a lot to unpack. Thank you for being vulnerable, by the way.
Yeah,
because I know
no
this is live. Okay, there's a lot of questions, but I'm curious. When you were going through those stages, I can relate to that as well, because I had a really close friend that was very similar to you, where he was a big people pleaser. And on the outside, everyone thought, wow, he's so popular. He's so outgoing. He likes everybody, popular or not. He would talk to you. He loved making people laugh. He loved doing all these crazy things just to fit in. And it's exhausting, I feel, to do that and to put up that front. And from the outside, people might be looking at you and saying, there's no way that kid's going to be the one that's depressed. There's no way that person's struggling. The person's so happy. So what do you say to that? Like what is the difference between the internal struggles versus the external struggles? Because somebody looking at you might be saying, well, you never got bullied. You never got none of this stuff where people isolated you and said you were, but how would you respond to that?
Oh, I definitely had my fair share of bullying. I got bullied and destroyed in elementary school. So there, I was always that skinny kid, being the skinny one in wrestling and whatever. Like I got tortured. So we can go into those days if people think that, but it's really, you look at Robin Williams and you look at all these really popular, famous comedians and actors and actresses, and they end up committing suicide. And you're left to question, they were always making people laugh. They're always providing so much joy. They were popular. They're well loved. They loved their family. And I'll just say, I can't explain depression. And I've tried explaining this, like even with my own family going through it. When I would go through like a depression episode or something, they'd be like, nothing wrong in your life is happening. So why are you depressed? And it's not something really you can control. It's a very much a mental game. And so unless you can get into my head and make these bad thoughts and these weird and confusing feelings go away, then you don't have a right to say anything because you're just not able to do that. And so a lot of the time for me, the biggest battles and struggles are always fought in silence. And for anyone listening that maybe goes through it or has friends that have gone through it or family members, it's not the big gestures of being like, hey, I love you and you're so cared about and you have purpose, and like being super intentional, calling out their darkness, if that makes sense. But it's the little things where you just shoot them a text. Hey, man, thinking about you today. Really appreciate our friendship. I look back on the great times and just had a good smile. Whatever. Something like that. Just because you never know when those moments hit. And I think it's understanding, just being okay with even just letting them vent, letting them talk. A lot of little stuff that makes more of a difference. So I don't know if I'm really answering your question, but I would say the ones that look the happiest are usually fighting off the darkest feelings and emotions. And again, like as cheesy as it sounds, like the darkest battles, because they have to put on a front sometimes, whether it's true or not, in order to help themselves feel better. They're trying to feel better. So that is an outlet for them to really try and actually portray it, then let the ugly, gross feelings be the actual front that everyone sees. It's the kind of, it's a stupid analogy. It's like having that one closet you don't clean, you just shove all your garbage into when people come over. You clean everything. The living room looks great and the bedrooms are all nice and neat and tidy. The kitchen's clean, dishes put away. But then you go to open like this one door and it's like, oh no, please don't open that door. We're under construction remodel, but yet there's all that garbage in there, from anxiety to depression to negative thoughts to self-image issues to emotional ups and downs that you can't understand, and all these other things. That's what's kind of, I say, the analogy. It looks great,
Yeah.
but there's always that one portion that's there. So just be, yeah, I don't know if I answered your question properly. So sorry
No,
for going on a little tangent, but
no, that's good. And actually, I related to that a little bit because my sister actually suffers from depression, or at least had depression periods. And the one time she attempted on pills, and this is, I've never talked in a public forum about this. So this is very interesting. I told her that day that we never had a really close relationship. It was like a brother sister, like I love her, but never
yeah,
like we hung out all the time. But I told her one thing that day, and it didn't stop her from attempting because she was already halfway through, but she wrote about it. And I told her, hey, I'm really looking forward to spending time with you in Colorado. That one thing I told her just went off.
yeah,
And she wrote about it, and she said when she was in the hospital, she wrote about it. She survived. Hey, I appreciated the fact that my brother came in and said that. That is so sweet. I would love to spend that time with him. But
yeah,
I need to do this. This is already, we're halfway through kind of deal. It was like pretty strong. But she's doing well now. She called the police because, or the ambulance 911.
yeah,
Thankfully, because my parents also didn't know what the heck was going on. She kept telling
yeah,
them that she was not doing it, and people were telling her that she was. Long story short, she's fine. But that taught me a lesson where I have to just consistently be appreciative and grateful for people in
yeah.
general, because you never know what people are going through. But
It,
that's
yeah.
a whole
No, go
nother
ahead.
tangent. I won't, that's all I'm gonna say there. We should, whatever. But going back to your story and what you were talking about, being able to find yourself, especially somebody like you, as somebody that's a very big giver. I feel like you give, sometimes you forget to take or give to yourself. And I think that's where a lot of people could potentially resonate. But moving on from that, you became the person that you are today. And
Mhm.
because you worked on yourself and you worked on who you wanted to become and you took the steps forward and found yourself, you were able to now, not only the hospitality network, but you also have these rental properties that you manage. Let's
Mhm.
go into that. Let's go into 2019. Wil is doing really well. What's Wil now? What's the next step for Wil? Like, he has a lot of rentals. What's he working on?
Yeah, so 2019, when I took the leap for podcasting full time, I also got exposed to Airbnb through my parents, who were tired of pretty much long term renting this apartment out. They're constantly getting bad guests, or not guests, sorry, tenants. So they were like having to replace a bunch of the hardwood flooring or whatever. And it's just, man, it's a money pit. They're late on rent or whatever. And the property is very nice. It's on attached to their main home, which is on 5 acres. And so it's really quiet and peaceful. And so they come up to me as a hotel manager and they're like, "Hey, we heard of this thing called Airbnb. We want to put the apartment on there. Do you think you could run it? Because we think it's like a hotel. Am I wrong?" And I was like, "No, we create a check-in time, checkout time. Revenue management was a very good skill of mine through the hotel. So I was like, you can easily revenue manage and get the best rates and blah, blah, blah." So I really much saw it as an individual standing alone hotel. And it's like the only thing we have to get rid of is front desk just by putting in a smart lock. And that's pretty dang simple. I'm a millennial. So of course I could figure out a smart lock. And we did that. And that's when I started talking more about the vacation rental side on my podcast, changing from hotel content to more vacation rental, guest experience, hospitality in general. And had my first business partners reach out and they were on the show and we decided to launch this luxury brand together. So we did had
Can I
these,
ask how you get the guests on the show?
yeah, it's a lot of back then it was a lot of reaching out. Hey, I have this podcast and I saw this one post and I thought this was really great. I would love to have you on my show. Now it's like we have a waiting list and it's more of being intentional with interviewing people with intentional stories and a bunch of other stuff. But back then it's just go through your Instagram, go through your Facebook, go through LinkedIn. LinkedIn's a great platform for a lot of B2B content and just find a community there that you can connect with and share posts. And then eventually you'll see more and more of that stuff that intrigues you and will want you to be on their show. Like you did with me. You DM me on Instagram. We're like, "Hey, love to have you on the pod." Like super simple. That's all you got to do.
Perfect. And is there
Yeah.
any time that people rejected you and said no or ignored you intentionally?
Yeah, I would say if people don't find it interest or if they've never heard of the show and they're not familiar with my background or kind of like the things we've done, then sometimes you'll get that one or two that just don't respond. We do, and honestly, you don't take it with don't get your heart broken or get offended when people are like, "Hey, we're really busy. We're working on a bunch of projects. Would love to come on the show once we're done and ready to talk about this." That would be cool. And that's usually the response that a lot of people give if they don't want to be on. If they do, which is very rare for them to be like, "No," or just because I don't want to, but it's usually due to they want to have something to talk about more. Um, and I always just tell people back then, it's like, "Hey, this isn't like a how-to podcast. This isn't where I'm going to be like, break down X, Y, and Z and give us a step by step. No, this is your story. So whether you're done with this project or not, like, I would love to just talk to you." And that's a really good way to get people to say yes.
And there's different ways of doing a podcast, right? You can do it with yourself. You can interview people like how I do it. You can, what other forms are there? Am I missing anything?
Yeah, so there's an interview format. Obviously, you can do that. I know people that go through interview format and solo. So they'll do one solo and one interview a week, or they'll vice versa, one interview to one solo. And that solo episode is like reflection of the interview that they did. Or we just did our first original through the network where it's a micro podcast. So it's no longer than 20 minutes per episode, very condensed content. It's not very much how to, but it's a mix of conversation and scripted how to answer. So it's called the Vacation Rental Micro School. And we got 4 experts and we broke down the one-on-one of short-term rentals and hosting. What are the basics? Anyone who has 1 property, 0 properties, up to 2 or 3 properties needs to know. And we just scripted it out, made bullet points, recorded, sent it off to the editor, and boom, now we have 20 episodes that are going out every day. So it's like, all right,
Perfect.
There's tons of different little things you can do to get a podcast.
Perfect. So going back to, I just wanted to chime in there, but going back to, you found your partner for the luxury. Let's go off of that.
Yeah. So I found my partners for the luxury management company. We had a 22,000 square foot castle, 35,000 square foot mansion on 55 acres of vineyards, like all this stuff. And then with COVID, I got activated for the National Guard, which is what I joined back in 2014 to get out of homelessness. And when that happened, I wasn't able to be playing the role that I was. Plus, the COVID times were just weird. And so me and the partners separated. I basically sold them my shares and said, "Keep going without me. I need to focus on what's at hand, which is the podcast and the military." And a year later, I launched recreation vacation rentals with my new business partner, who I actually met through the podcast. He was my first industry guest I ever had on the show. And now 4 or 5 years later, we're close friends. We talk every week and we partnered up on this management company together because he brings 25 years of hotel and professional luxury experience, and I brought in my younger hotel management to now media experience and just love for people. So yeah, we found a really good partnership through that and
So
took
it
my
did work
parents
out well. So it worked
yeah.
out the fact that you were putting out podcasts. You met somebody that initially set off this venture that allowed you to get the rentals. So the podcast directly allowed you to find somebody, meet somebody that allowed you to scale and build
Yeah,
your empire.
and it was very unintentional. Again, like I never used the podcast to be like, I'm gonna go get
Yeah.
guests or I'm gonna find co-hosts or property owners,
Mhm.
whatever the goal was. But reached out to me during the pandemic after I was done with that partnership and then also dwindling down off of my army orders. And when he did, he went from 25 years as a hotel GM slash regional VP. So like overseeing multiple properties with multiple brands from St. Regis to you name it. And he texted me one day. He was like, "Hey, what's all this Airbnb short-term rental stuff you're talking about?" And I was like, "Dude, it's just like hotels, but they're way more scattered and they're usually a lot more pain in the ass logistic wise." He's, "Oh, dude, we gotta talk." And so we jumped on the phone, and that's when we were like, if we're gonna do this, the hotelier in us was like, we got to create a brand. We can't just be a host, right, on Airbnb. And there's nothing wrong with that, but for us, we're like, we want to create a brand with a brand standard, with amenities and experiences and technology and a staff. Like we had, like that hotel experience was very good for us to have. And so we created recreation vacation rentals. We branded it. We set the tone of what our mission was, what we wanted to do, and how we wanted to feel and look like. And the home avatar that we wanted to have. Is it 4 bedrooms? Is it 5? What kind of concepts can we create around guest experience? And yeah, so we did that. And it ended up, it's taken us a while and we've gone very much the natural route of not buying any property yet. We're getting into that now, but really just like, all right, let's get management contracts and figure out how to grow this and scale and put our ideas in action.
That's awesome. And I will say that the fact that you've been constantly giving back and constantly giving value, giving information, giving knowledge, free flowing on the podcast is very intentional that you do that, not because you want to get all these deals per se, but because you want to truly help people out. People have seen that and then they want to work with you pretty much.
Yeah,
So
100%.
the intention's there. Because if your why is, hey, I'm just doing this to get more deals, to do all this stuff, which is a byproduct sometimes of doing these kind of things, but the intentions have to be, hey, I'm here to help people. And I think, and I will say, just to go off, the conference that we put on, the fact that we didn't sell any masterminds or anything like that, I think the intention was true and it showed. And I think that's why people really enjoyed it. So same goes with whatever you do in anything that you do in life and real estate. Oh, you have 10 rentals now, right?
Yep.
And I'm going to go into the last 3 questions here and close this off. What are the 3, or what is the future plans for Wil?
Future plans for Wil, my big vision, and again, I think you and I are talking off the recording, but I don't own majority of the company or half the company anymore of my management company. In March, I told my business partner I want to pursue the podcast network more as a full-time thing than the management company. So I still have shares, I still have equity. I'm just not involved in the day-to-day. So I'm very much with him on, hey, what needs to change in our systems, our tech stack and owner operations, and just going into the day-to-day more of a bigger picture view rather than the day-to-day ops. But for me, my biggest passion is the podcast network. We've, in a year of launching the network, we launched in December 1st or December 2nd of 20. Yeah, what year is it now? We're 2023, so 2022. Or going into 2022, I think we launched. I know it's been a little over a year, and we started with 6 shows, and now we're at 30, and we've really gotten into this rhythm of, okay, we know who we are, we know what we want to do, and this is how we're going to grow. This is what makes us different. So obviously sales comes into that and hitting certain sales numbers with sponsors and ad deals, but then also working one-on-one with the shows on better quality and content, from sound quality, the video, to new and different ideas that brings more audience, stuff like that. So the next phase is really just growing the network, just taking it legit serious becoming a big player in the media space that can compete with the Wanderies and the Gimlets of the media industry. For those who are listening, Gimlet Media was bought by Spotify, Wandery was bought by Amazon. So these are big podcast networks that have some real capital behind them. And we're 100% bootstrapped with no outside funding. So
that is amazing. And what's the
that's what
future of podcasting in general? I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Man, we'd have to do like another episode. But the future of podcasting is this. It's not podcasting in general, it's media. It's content creation. So the creator economy is the future of what our world is heading into. And the way we look at podcasts is not just as a standalone podcast. A podcast starts as a podcast with baked in ads, which for those who are listening, baked in is just edited in ads. They're always going to live in that episode unless you unedit it and redo it. To then getting into dynamic ads, which is like dynamic revenue management with Wheelhouse or Price Labs or whatever your tool is, where you can have dynamically inserted ads. And then it evolves into a book deal and evolves to doing a conference. And then it evolves into signing with Netflix or a private TV show on HGTV. Or the creator economy is an ecosystem and it grows in phases. And so we see it as a lot of our creators in like phase 2, where they're doing ads, sponsorship deals on Instagram or TikTok, to then writing a book and maybe starting a conference. To then phase 3, they have a conference, they're doing in-person events. The listeners are not just listeners, they're part of their community and they're getting to know them and they're going to dinners and breakfasts and coffees and you name it. To then evolving.
The last question, what book do you recommend to the listeners? It doesn't have to be anything in regards to real estate if you don't want it to be.
Rocket Fuel.
Yes. First person to recommend this. Thank you.
Yeah, you have
Love
to get
that.
Rocket Fuel. Especially the biggest thing I'm learning. I'm a visionary. I can be both visionary and executioner. I thrive in vision and suffer sometimes in execution. So finding that person to really be your yin to yang. Rocket Fuel is such a good book for that. EOS and the book Traction, I think I have on my book stand over there, but Traction is like a great tool. You need to learn those so that way you can really take the next level.
I agree. And I'm also a visionary. So if there's anybody out there that's an integrator, please contact either Will or myself. So we need you guys. You guys are tuckled away in those corporate jobs sometimes. And if you want to just be around a crazy free-willed entrepreneur and drive some of your own creations, then definitely come on board. 100%. And for people that want to reach you, Will, how can they reach you?
Yeah, the best platform I'm on the most, and I'm sorry for people maybe are listening and I haven't responded, but I promise I will get to it, is LinkedIn. I'm more active on LinkedIn than I think any other platform. Instagram for stories and posting on there, but I don't have social media apps on my phone. So forgive me if I do take a while to get to you. It's just I use another app to limit that distraction of scrolling and being endless and in the scroll of TikTok and LinkedIn and Instagram and all that good stuff. So yeah, that would be the best one. Will with 1L Slickers on LinkedIn.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Will, for hopping on, sharing your knowledge, being transparent,